The drama that is the story of Esther is drawing to a close. When we last saw Mordecai, he was holding a sword in one hand and a copy of the king's latest decree in the other. Xerxes had allowed Mordecai to draft this order in the king's own name and seal it with his signet ring. Mordecai had made sure the Jews could defend themselves in every province of Persia. We soon learn what happened as a result of the king's decree. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them, because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. And all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because fear of Mordecai had seized them. It's quite a turnaround for the man who only wanted to blend in and not rock the boat. It's quite a turnaround as well for God's people. But the story does not end there. The actors have one more scene to perform before the curtain closes for the final time, and they all take their bows. For the book of Esther does not end with a battle, but with a call to remember. In this final act, we see Mordecai once again sitting at the table in his home. But this time he has a pen in one hand and a piece of parchment in another. He is writing out a set of letters that will be delivered by the king's couriers. As we read, Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another, and gifts to the poor. Seasons of struggle can be treacherous times for the human heart. When times are tough, we're sitting ducks for discouragement and defeat. Despair can be a dangerous season, but it can also be a developing time. Just as the actors in our play spent the long winter months rehearsing their lines and crafting their performances, so God can use our winter seasons to refine and shape us for the springtime to come. It is during such times that we can learn to trust in God, lean into His Word, and rely on His ways. Tough times can make us bitter or make us better. The wonderfully wild story of Esther helps us to make the right choice. So, before the director calls for the final curtain to close, let's revisit the key passage in the book. It involves a declaration and a question, both offered by Mordecai. At that point in the story, he had stripped himself of his Persian disguise. He was a picture of anguish as he considered the plight of his people. He wore sackcloth and ashes and cried out to Esther to intervene. Esther initially resisted his request. Dare she risk her life and make an appeal to the fickle Xerxes? Instead of promising salvation, she sent back a list of excuses. Mordecai's reply to Esther was surprisingly sober. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. What Mordecai communicated through both his declaration and his question was a call to faith, specifically a call to faith that relief would come from the God they served. Mordecai's message for his cousin was that the Persian king was no challenge for the Almighty King. An evil despot could not escape the hand of the sovereign Lord. That same message applies to you today. God's got this. He will help you face your winter time. You need only shift your focus away from the struggles at hand and ponder the power of your God. Sometimes I wonder if the church has forgotten the vastness of God. Visit a congregation on a given Sunday, and you'll likely find a group of people sitting in comfortable chairs hearing a comforting message about a God who keeps us comfortable. Do we really know the one before whom we gather? Do we understand that demons flee at the sound of His name? Do we comprehend that angels have been singing, "Holy, holy, holy," since creation and haven't sung it enough? Are we suffering from a loss of awe? And if we are, what are the consequences? Here's what I believe. Where God is small, problems are large. A wimpy God makes for a wimpy heart, but a great God makes for a solid saint. So let God be big. Believe that He is big. When troubles come, don't measure the height of the mountain. Ponder the power of the one who made it. Don't tell God how big your storm is. Tell the storm how big your God is. Accept the invitation of the psalmist. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt His name together. To magnify is to expand and enlarge. Our tendency is to magnify our fears. We place a magnifying glass on the diagnosis, the disease, or the debt. Stop that. Meditate less on the mess and more on the Master. Less on the problems and more on His power. This is exactly what Mordecai and Esther did in the story. Remember, Esther could have refused. She could have cowered in fear, but instead she spoke, and God used her to save the nation. It's not hyperbole to state that their courage changed the course of history, nor is it an overstatement to say that same God can do the same for you. He can reach down and touch your life in a way that produces just the turnaround you need. And when He does, remember His faithfulness. Remember His goodness, His justice, His mercy, and His power. This is what Mordecai was compelling God's people to do as he wrote out those letters. The commemoration quickly became known as the Feast of Purim. And just as Christians read the story of the birth of Christ at Christmas, the Jews read the story of Esther during the Feast of Purim. Each year, the holiday starts the day after the original scheduled day of execution, a reminder that the day has come and gone and the Jews are still standing. Purim holidays are rowdy affairs, a bit like a masquerade party. There is an abundance of food, drink, and costumes. As the story is read, the audience reacts. Haman's name prompts loud boos and hisses and shouts. The idea is to muffle the very sound of his appearance. In fact, in one of the more controversial passages in the Talmud, Jews are instructed to drink wine on Purim until they can't tell the difference between the phrases, "Cursed is Haman" and "Blessed is Mordecai." Not a practice we would recommend today for the church. The name Purim itself may sound odd to us, but like Christmas, it serves a purpose and sends its own message. Back when Haman was devising his evil scheme against God's people, he chose the date for the Jews' execution by casting lots, which were called Pur, P-U-R. Here's the passage. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the Pur, that is, the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and month. We might think of it as rolling a set of dice. Yet, it's another example of Haman's arrogance. He was both willing and eager to gamble with human lives. What Haman didn't realize is what Solomon expressed in the book of Proverbs. People throw lots to make a decision, but the answer comes from the Lord. This truth is exactly why the Jewish people named their feast Purim. Haman threw the dice, but ultimately, God was in control of where the dice landed. Sadly, we have a tendency to neglect this truth. We often forget that God is for us and not against us. We feel that He is far away and not present in our everyday lives. Do we not all suffer from spiritual amnesia? We forget. We forget that God can make beauty out of ashes, joy out of mourning, an army out of a valley of dead bones, and rejoicing out of sorrow. We need memorials that jog our memory about the glories of the gospel. Fortunately, the Bible gives us a good one. The Christian version of the Persian miracle involves not Esther and Susa, but God's Son buried in a tomb. Just as Haman declared a death sentence on the Jews, so Satan declared a death sentence on the source of life himself. Jesus the Christ was Jesus the corpse. No pulse, no breath, no hope. Wrapped tighter than an Egyptian mummy, 3 days dead in a borrowed tomb. His enemies raised a toast to a dead Messiah, and his followers? Well, they weren't scattered in the provinces of Persia, but they were hiding in the bare cupboards and corners of Jerusalem for fear that they would be next. Their world was broken. Their hearts were broken. They had left everything to follow Jesus. The fishermen left their nets. The tax collectors left jobs. They left it all. Now it seemed that Jesus had returned the favor. He had left them. Thanks to 3 nails and a cross, the light of the world had gone dark. The Savior of humanity couldn't save himself. Heaven's hope was a hoax. Jesus, the Son of God, had been done in by the Haman of hell, or so it seemed. Just when it seemed all joy was lost, then came the turnaround. A heart began to beat, eyelids popped open, pierced hands lifted, and Jesus stood up and placed his heel squarely on the head of Satan. The God of great turnarounds performed his greatest work on Easter Sunday. And just so we would never forget this moment, Jesus gave us our own Purim celebration. On the eve of his crucifixion, Jesus took some bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to the apostles, saying, "This is my body, which I am giving for you. Do this to remember me." In the same way, after supper, Jesus took the cup and said, "This cup is the new agreement that God makes with his people. This new agreement begins with my blood, which is poured out for you." Those words are precious to Christians today, but they must have been curious to the apostles. A broken body, spilled blood, can good come from this? We ask the same thing about our broken world, our leaky faith, our fragile dreams. Can good come from this? Esther says yes. Easter says yes. Purim says yes. Communion says yes. This is the promise of God. It only falls to us to receive it. Receive the cup. Receive the bread. Don't toss in the towel. Don't give up on life. Don't cave into despair. Promise me you won't. I challenge you to take God at his word and reframe the way you see this season of life. Recast the struggle for what it is, an opportunity for God to do again what he does the best. He can flip a story on its head and resurrect life out of death. What's more, never forget that the God of great turnarounds is the God who holds the future in his hands. And never forget that for followers of Christ, the future is filled with victory from horizon to horizon. Yes, we'll go through many seasons of instability and eras of confusion. At times, it will seem the entire world is in a state of trauma. People will question why they were born or to where they are destined. This is the age of much know-how and very little know-why. The invisible enemy of sin and secularism has left us dazed and bewildered. But don't be done in by the bad news. Don't fall victim to the confusion. The voices of panic and chaos are loud, but don't drink the Kool-Aid. The world is in desperate need for a people of God who will stay steady in the chaos. You have a good God who has a good plan, and that plan is revealed in his good book. Today's confusion will be tomorrow's conquest. You were created for this specific season to do God's good work. and to declare his goodness to any who will hear. This is your Mordecai moment. This is your Esther event. You, yes, you, were made for this moment.